friends. This is Rick the Grease Man, and we're coming back for a second stab at this ancient history mythology thing about giants and monster-sized human beings and so on from mythology and various sources. Mostly my crazy take on these things, and a brief conversation in the commentary section with At Lurker brought up some points, some valid points, and I thought we would look at these just a hair. Of course, one being is that genetically speaking, evolutionarily speaking, the human body, the human being, as we know it, are not capable of growing too much further than 10 feet or so in size. And we have living examples of this today. Well, not quite 10 feet by any means. Ming here is 7 foot or close to 7 foot. We're damn close. And look how he towers over his fellow respectably tall players. And this is just one of many individuals that crop up. You can go look at fellows in the history books, and I'm talking about. Damn it. Anyway, these individuals are born and grow, and some of them have a form of giantism or something. It's a genetic defect or that causes their bones to continue to grow all through their lives. Genetically speaking, these fellows, and there's nothing to take away from them, but most of them get to the point where, physically speaking, their size is more of a detriment to them than anything else. They're not going to be fearsome soldiers and or enforcers or so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that, physically speaking, it's what Lurker and I agree with what he's saying, is that the human body has a limitation. There's a reason why evolution intended to have creatures that are much taller and bigger be four-footed. Although I have to point out that you go back far enough in the evolutionary track of the Earth, and there's many dinosaurs and other beasts that ran around on 2 feet. The T-Rex was pretty effing big and weighed into tons, and he did not go around on 4 legs. He ran around on 2 legs. So the genetic plausibility for a 15-foot tall, 20-foot tall beast that sits on its hind legs is there. Granted, he has a tail that helps balance him, and his structure is such that he's looks like, and actually we believe, a relative of, or a distant progenitor of the chicken, but the fact is the functions were capable. Now, the earth conditions, the environment conditions back then were much different than they are today, which may have allowed for the we believe, scientists believe, that, of course, unless you're one of the odd half of the country's population that believes scientists are full of crap, and I absolutely have no idea that anything that's scientifically based has any merit whatsoever. The atmosphere and the conditions of the time allowed for these creatures to grow much bigger than they would be today. Now the opposite things, because the opposite applies when we talk about people. When we start talking about people have this habit of actually growing the other direction, right? We're talking where we've gotten larger in our current times than our ancestors were thousands of years ago. So during the time of the biblical stories of David and the Goliath, for example, David would have been a small, 5 foot something, very skinny, partially malnourished individual who went up against a very colossal individual. Goliath could have been 6'6" and 300 pounds and would have dwarfed and physically towered over David as an example. Atlas as a character, a potential person. Hercules in the stories, if he was real, these are more significant people. And in those stories, Hercules, for example, is the product of some kind of genetic manipulation. It's said so in his mythological story that he's the son of Zeus. Hence, he's got other than human blood and DNA in his system, which grants him some miraculous abilities, physical stature, things like this. So we're not getting hypothetically speaking here. So we look at, modern day things can get to be pretty effing big compared to, older stuff. And genetically speaking, it's still there. And when I make the argument that it's quite possible for our current genetics to take For example, this big, huge draft horse there, I don't think he's a Belgian, but Belgians are pretty effing big. And I've been around them off and on my whole life, and like a Clydesdale. These are very impressive beings and beasts. And if you were to take the genetic blueprints from them and meld them with human genetics some way, so we could end up with a 7 foot tall, Bojack. The possibilities there, the technology potentially could function. We can make all of the poo-poos and nay-nays all we want, but the truth is we don't know what science is capable of in that field because we hamstring it. We don't allow them to experiment, and for good reason. There's other reasons we don't want giant critters running around and so on and so forth. But historically speaking, according to some people, there's evidence. Here's some structured bones that came from a work somewhere in the Middle East, and it's implied that this is the bones of a giant. Look at them in the size comparison to the people around them. Now, some people can say that that's a Photoshop or it's altered in some way. I'm not an expert. How can I tell you? There's physical evidence of creatures, of bone structures, of human-like bone structures that do grossly exceed what is considered acceptable by them for the maximum size of a legitimate human being's evolution. So I say once again, we'll never know. And I grant you, short of somehow or another finding some absolute concrete evidence that everybody will attribute or will subscribe to, is not likely to happen anytime in my lifetime. But one can hope, and we go and we look and think, is it plausible? So, one of 3 possible scenarios, maybe 4. First is obvious, exaggeration. So we get some pretty big structured, big bone human beings that occur in our gene pool on occasion, and the rest of us are absolutely awed by them or terrified by them, and they take advantage of that to some elements. So they do armor up, and the armor and the weapons make them look even more imposing, and it's hype. Their hype is built up to. So we have Goliath, who's the champion of the whatever peoples he was a champion of, and blah blah blah, and nobody could defeat him, and blah blah blah. Well, Andrew the Giant with an axe and armor, it's in his prime. Right? He might have been 7 foot instead of looking like he was 8 foot, but he still would have terrorized the hell out of most everybody standing in front of him with their spears and their small swords and bronze shields. Just saying, right? So the second scenario, of course, is pure BS, pure hype, pure story. Just like today, there are storytellers all throughout history who exaggerated or just flat out made things up. It's hard and it's easy because they're so rare. It would be easy for us to take some of the stuff we think of as potential fact as pure fiction. So somebody back in the day decided that this place called Atlantis existed and made a bunch of stories about it because other people really wanted to hear those stories, and they felt that these had value and were quite interesting to them. So yeah, why not, right? And it turns out it's total BS. Even we don't have enough conclusive evidence beyond a doubt to say Atlantis was here. Atlas slept here, right? Hercules lived here. No matter what, we don't have that 100%. So a third scenario, this is where we start getting into the genetics. Humanity, through its evolution, has had diversions. All you have to do is look at the pygmies of certain islands and locations in the Pacific and Asia. There's proof because they still exist today. There's dwarfism in the human gene pool as well. So obviously, where there can be dwarves, there can be giants. Human beings can evolve, be born, and grow huge proportions. How do you think these 3 fellows standing here, which if you look at the comparison to the 2 girls that they're standing next to, the odds are those girls were about the right height for what the men were 3,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago. So, what do you think the rest of the soldiers and warriors or people in the facing off against a handful of fellows like this would have thought? Well, there was a whole contingent of these fellows. Now, granted, the odds are pretty rare, but if we go far enough back in the history books, or the non-history books that don't exist, but the history of human evolution, the possibility that there were tribes of people who were much taller than the average the average people in the world, and in doing so, as a tribe, as a unit, faced off against their more normal size at the time people, and had to, inflict casualties on them, or however you want to look at it. I mean, how do you propose this? I mean, I look at a picture like this, and both these fellas are imposing. I would not want to run up against either one of these guys in a hostile situation. I would be terribly uncomfortable. And I'm 6'2", and when I was at my peak, I was 6'2", 230 pounds, capable of benching my weight plus. I spent most of my younger years tossing hay bales all day long, and during the summers, and shoveling snow in the winters and things like this. And always been a bit chunky, but that just added to the physique. And I have and still have calves bigger than most people's biceps. In a lot of aspects, I've had bodybuilders and weightlifters come up and go, "Oh my God, what did you do to get bicep or to get calves that big?" And I says, "Well, I drug my fat butt out of bed every day, and I rode bikes until I was into my mid 20s, and throw hay bales all summer long for odd jobs and things like that. So, physically speaking, you know, it is what it is. Running up and down the hills that my folks' property had also played a part. When you're a kid and you're running around your backyard, imagine your backyard being 5 acres and and split into two large hills. So you run up and down both directions, right? With a nice little creek in the far back. So you'd run down the hill from the house, down through the pasture, up the hill, over it, and down the other side of the hill to get to the creek, and repeat. And do that 20, 30 times a day during the summer. It wasn't, and then add some genetics, because all of the men in my family are pretty good sized people. So you have to go, or you don't have to go. You could just think and ask, what if, right? Genetically speaking, probably not bigger than 10 foot. No. So were there giants? The last one, of course, becomes the most controversial. It's genetic manipulation once again. Whether it be aliens, quote, the gods, who come in and tweak the DNA to create organic whatevers to function in a certain specific roles, whether it's in, like I said, if you need a 20-foot tall fellow with the ability to lift a ton or 2 tons, and you get 20 and you get 10 of them together, then what couldn't you build? You wouldn't need 1,000 of these fellows, so you wouldn't need to genetically develop a whole tribe of these things. You're going to genetically engineer what you need, and they're going to function until they don't function, and then they die, and maybe leave some bones laying around that freak out and puzzle people to this day. And then you regrow a few additional ones. Or these were an organic transfer between actual beast DNA and human DNA to create something that's 10, 12, 15 feet tall that can lift a truck. So once again, possibility. What was the science capability for 10,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago for humanity? We all want to say they were the Stone Age people or hunter-gatherers. Truth is, we haven't freaking a clue. We're just speculating and guessing, and we get a few bits and pieces of stuff here and there that we use for some evidence, or we suggest it's evidence, but we can't prove it. And of course, there's that, like I said, the alien thing come in and manipulate. And then there's the ancient human thing, where we actually are in a cycle of existence, and nature has a habit of wiping the slate clean. We may not like the idea, but we could be in the middle of that, or we could be in the infancy of something of that nature right now. This global pandemic, whether you've tried mediation and mitigation and not tried it, what have you, we're facing a third wave of this crap, and every day the numbers are increasing worldwide. Yeah, they're increasing dramatically here in the United States. You can't, if you're blind to that and you're in denial, I don't care. The rest of us who are not in denial understand, or at least fear what the potential for this thing could become. This could become, something else? How long before the death rate comes to 10,000 people, 50,000 people a day? And we're putting a lot of faith in a handful of very rushed drugs that may mitigate the illness, and it may not. They may mutate it. Do we take it? Do we take the pill or we don't take? Do you take the little red pill or don't you? Right? What could it affect our genetics? What could it turn us into? I mean, nature has a way of doing some strange stuff. And why not giant people at some point in history? That might be their legacy lingering in our gene pool as to why we see these fine individuals of this nature. Why not? All right. So once again, hey, this is great. Hope you guys had a good time, and we'll see you on the next one. Yeah, I'm done.